On this third part of the premium home Wi-Fi 6 setup comparison series, I will be comparing the ease of use amongst Aruba Instant, Ruckus Unleashed, and Ubiquiti Unifi Wi-Fi systems. Let's get started. For each of the systems, the latest version of OS firmware at the time of this recording are used. Each systems were configured with multiple access points set up with at least 3 or more access points. As a home user, the simplicity in Wi-Fi system is very important. For me, the ideal Wi-Fi system is set up once and forget. If you only need a single access point with basic functionality, each system allows an option to set them up as a standalone mode. This is simple for any of the three, but it lacks features such as group configuration of access points and radio resource management. Today, I'll be focusing on cluster mode of operation setup in each system, where multiple access points can be configured as a group. In this category of comparison, I'll be looking at the followings: ease of initial setup, ease of navigation, ease of customization, and ease of optimization. Unlike typical consumer-graded mesh network systems, plug-and-play offering, each of three systems require a little more time commitment from user for the initial setup. The common general flow for initial setup is configure controller unit, create first SSID, add or more access points. Creating the first SSID on each system is simple, step by step for all three. Once the controller is up and running, adding more AP in any of three systems is essentially plug and play. So the extra effort in each system comes from the controller unit setup. Let's take a close look. In Aruba Instant, the first access point on the network becomes a virtual controller, while it is still serving normal access point function. Subsequently added access points will copy the virtual controller setting, so if the original access point goes down for any reason, any of the other access points can take over the controller role. While both Aruba Instant and Ruckus Unleashed support different mode of operations on a given hardware, Aruba Instant allows conversion between non-instant and instant mode of operation through the simple admin menu selection. This means even if you got an access point running in a non-instant mode, you can easily convert it to instant mode through browser admin GUI, as long as the access point has proper version of hardware installed. This is different on Ruckus Unleashed, and I'll be explaining this later. The hardest part of Aruba Instant setup is actually not even part of Aruba configuration itself. It is actually the creating a free account on their official website. Although this isn't required for functional Aruba Instant access point, if you need to download a particular version of a firmware, this may be something you need to do to obtain the copy of the firmware. As a first-time Aruba user, I even had a difficulty finding the proper official website to register. But the real challenge was they don't take public domain email like Gmail. Some suggested to use work email, but one of the steps requiring registration was linking to existing domain group based on the email domain. In my case, my work already had an account with HP Aruba, but I did not want to link my account to the work, because this is purely for my personal use. Fortunately, I have a private domain email account, so I was able to create an account. Even though it did not cost me anything, this was the most tedious online account registration I have ever experienced. Ruckus Unleashed controller runs on the access point similar to Aruba Instant. If you have Ruckus Unleashed firmware pre-installed on your access point, the initial setup of Ruckus is extremely easy. After the initial powering, it takes several minutes for the system to initialize. When the master access point is ready, its browser-based admin page immediately takes us to setup. This is the cleanest first page setup I've ever seen. It has minimum required amount of information for a new Wi-Fi system. On this single page, the first SSID name, Unleashed admin account name, and their respective password will be only required for fields to fill. I wish this becomes a standard practice for every new Wi-Fi system setup. The potential extra step of Ruckus Unleashed is firmware flash. Unlike Aruba Instant, Ruckus will require full firmware flashing for switching between different modes of operation. If you purchase Ruckus access point with model number starting 901, they do not come with unleashed firmware. So the first step is to flash the unleashed firmware. In order to download new firmware, we have to first register on Ruckus support website. The registration and actual download of firmware is free. Unlike Aruba, registering on Ruckus support site was as easy as registering for any other website, and you can use public domain email address. So this wasn't hard by any means, but Ruckus could have certainly made this simpler by having a first setup page to let user choose unleashed versus other mode and download firmware from online automatically if internet is available. Unlike the other two systems, Unifi requires controller running on separate unit outside of the access point. The option here involves either significant amount of time commitment or extra money. The first option is free, which is to set up self-hosted Unifi's controller server on own device. However, this option involves quite a bit of tweaking and running a risk of unexpected issue. I have not tried this option myself, but I've read some facing technical difficulty that sounds like attributable to taking this route. Officially recommended option is to purchase dedicated controller unit like Unifi Dream Machine series, CloudKey, or recently released Unifi Express. The practical price range of these units for home user purpose ranges from about $150 to $999. If you view these units as sole controller for Unifi cluster access point operation, this becomes added cost to these access points. However, in most cases, we purchase these devices for additional features. In my personal case, I have had Unifi Dream Machine Pro almost from the day one of my Unifi experience. This is also router gateway unit and runs video surveillance system. So I am certainly getting more value than just an access point controller. As the third option, there is also monthly subscription-based cloud controller offering, but I'm not interested in this option at the moment as it feels analogous to paying license to use network gears. Regardless of whichever controller option you end up choosing, the very first step for Unifi's cluster access point setup is to configure the controller. Since Unifi Dream Machine Pro is a router gateway unit, there were moments I had lost internet access at home while setting this up. I had ended up trying the initial setup at least 3 times before I got it to work. At one point, I had even worried that I might have bricked the brand new unit. My personal experience goes back to almost 4 years ago, so I thought this was no longer relevant, but recently I read a Reddit post mentioning identical to what I have experienced. As a home user, the ease of use correlates with user interface. When it comes to graphical user interface, Ubiquiti's prosumer-graded design shines here. Most users who are looking into options like Unifi are tech-savvy and enthusiasts, but most of us are not at the level of network or Wi-Fi engineers. So many of us prefer graphical user interface over the command line interface. We are also used to seeing visually defined apps. While all three systems offer the similar types of data through the admin menu, Unifi put extra effort with many nice graphical representation of those data. Although some of these graphs may not necessarily add any system performance benefit, they are visually more appealing and give me more excitement while navigating Unifi UI. In contrast, Ruckus Unleashed graphical user interface looks as if it was developed 2 decades ago. If I had not known the reputation of Ruckus access point performance, I would have actually worried if this is really built by high-quality vendor. Yet this turned out to be the most intuitive of all three for navigation purpose. Even for my first use, I knew immediately where the data or configuration what I want to change be located in Ruckus Unleashed admin menu. On my initial use, Aruba Instant felt the least intuitive of all three systems, and it has the steepest learning curve. One of the main reasons is related to the fact some of the Aruba Instant feature requires subscription or license, yet such requirement is not obvious. So I ended up spending a few hours here and there only to find out eventually that I actually do not have a proper subscription or license to enable certain functionality. I had wished they made it clear by disabling those features or flags user immediately when proper subscription or license is not available within the system. Aruba Instance navigation is not as intuitive as Ruckus Unleashed. There are many options, and some felt to be hidden under an unexpected section for the first-time user like myself. Its graphical representation is not as pretty as Unifi, even though they do offer some graphical data. However, once I get a hang of it, it's grown on me. For example, I like the right upper corner search box, where I can search for client device, network name, and jump to the detail from anywhere. With any of these three systems, majority of home users will need to do some custom configuration beyond the basic SSID creation. However, the relative effort required amongst each system will differ. Since each home use case is different, I can only compare the system based on my personal use. For my home, we have a little over 40 plus Wi-Fi devices. These devices consist a dozen of Apple products and various brands IoTs. Amongst these devices, our specific home needs include AirPlay airplane support, Sonos speaker compatibility, Bowers and walk-in wireless speaker compatibility, guest network creation, and IoT network creation. Let's take a close look at how easy or difficult each system were to configure them. In order to use features like AirPlay, or Google Chromecast, the network needs to support broadcast or multicast. In an enterprise setting, these traffics can be a massive source of network congestion. By default, they are therefore blocked or restricted. So we need to enable this in each system. In Aruba Instant, this requires disabling default broadcast filtering setting on a specific SSID. Aruba goes in detail including explanation why we need to do this on their user manual. In fact, this is how I learned the detail about why broadcast multicast needed for features like AirPlay. Yet this was far from being obvious for casual user like myself. I only learned this after referencing to the 500 plus page official user manual. For Unifi, this is configured at the level of LAN or VLAN. This is by enabling the multicast DNS option. Unifi has a hover over text specifically addressing this is recommended feature for AirPlay within their admin menu. So despite not understanding the technical detail, I was able to get my airplane going with Unifi's system. On Ruckus Unleashed, some suggest we need to set directed multicast broadcast threshold down to 0. For me, the default value of 1 worked fine. In another word, I did not have to do anything with Ruckus Unleashed to get airplane to function. Sonos system can be one of the major source of connectivity incompatibility in Wi-Fi networks due to their system design. In short, Sonos setup can be either wired or wireless. The wired setup needs at least one and usually exactly one Sonos speaker wired and rest are wireless. In this setup, Sonos creates their own 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi mesh network called SonosNet. The wired speaker will act as a hub in this setup. In wireless setup, all speakers will be wireless and they will be connected to your own home Wi-Fi network just like any other Wi-Fi client devices in your home. For Aruba Instant, all I had to do was the same as just AirPlay, just by disabling broadcast filter. With that, Sonos net and wireless setup worked without any issue in Aruba Instant. Unifi has an official article about Sonos on Unifi network. Their recommendation is either wire all speakers or do not wire any. The former sounds like not a good use for Sonos speaker for most users. On the other hand, I personally like the latter setup, and that's how I have been using Sonos on my Unifi network. Just like Aruba Instant, here all we need to do is turn on the MDNS. I personally cannot recall testing Sonos net setup in Unifi myself, but based on Unifi's official article, it sounds like this is not recommended setup by Ubiquiti. Ruckus Unleashed addresses about Sonos compatibility challenge on their own official website article. Their recommendation is to use Sonos Net. This worked well for me. However, for the wireless setup, I had to do a bit of online research and my personal testing. Eventually, what I found out is that while it can be done, this needs to access command line interface and essentially turn off QoS. This was the most complicated configuration change I had to do amongst 3 systems for Sonos compatibility. I'm also a bit worried that turning off QoS altogether, as that can potentially affect other part of network performance. Bowers and Wilkins Formation Speaker series are basically like Sonos speakers, but all are meant for wireless. None of the 3 systems had immediate issue connecting these, including 2.1 stereo pair setup. However, Unifi setup had strange, unpredictable intermittent disconnect of Bowers and Wilkins speakers when the system was not used for a while. Sometimes I had to just reboot the speaker, but the other times I had to reset them to get 2.1 pairing going. This has not happened on Aruba Instant or Ruckus Unleashed so far. Usually, we want to isolate IoT devices into their own Wi-Fi network. One main reason is they tend to be slow and usually do not require high priority. So making 2.4 GHz only radio is a good idea. So here, the very basic setup requirement is to creating a single radio SSID. All 3 systems supports this. In all 3 systems, these options are hidden under Advanced Options setting. The same can of course be done to create 5 GHz radio-only network. Guest Wi-Fi is also common amongst home users. The key setting usually here is isolation. We want to isolate client device talking to each other within the WLAN. And also we want to ensure the client device do not have any access to underlying home network devices. All 3 supports guest Wi-Fi network creation with step-by-step configuration menu. They all even supports cafe or airport-like hotspot option with customizable login page, if you want to go that direction. In the end, all 3 can achieve the same core task of guest Wi-Fi network. However, here Aruba Instant was the hardest to set up. Unlike the other 2, Aruba Instant default SSID setup is allow all connections. So we need to manually add set of access control rules to block all connections, just like a firewall. This has to be in exact order and also explicitly allow DHCP and DNS for proper function. In contrast, Ruckus Unleashed automatically adds equivalent access control rule settings when guest Wi-Fi type is selected. I'm not sure why Aruba Instant did not do the same, since they also offer guest as type of SSID. Wi-Fi performance is influenced by interference. Proper channel parameter setting and cell size adjustment are paramount for reducing Wi-Fi interference. In home setup, Wi-Fi environment may change dynamically due to neighbor's Wi-Fi, so channel parameter setting may need adjustment if we want to maintain high system performance. In multi-AP setup, suboptimal selection of these parameters can result in creation of a worse interference source and degrade Wi-Fi performance significantly. As a result, we may see reduction in throughput, lose seamless roaming, and even frequent device disconnect. And therefore, availability of automatic radio resource management can be a major simplicity factor for some. If a system offers full radio resource management, optimal performance can be maintained without any manual labor and time devotion from the user. On the other hand, if a system lacking any automatic radio resource management, we might have to spend hours to configure the optimal performance at the beginning, and may even need to readjust whenever Wi-Fi environment changes. For my 3AP535 setting, Aruba Instant's radio resource management settles to 3 non-overlap 2.4 GHz channel. For 5 GHz at 80 MHz channel width, it settles to 1 overlap channel pair, with one of the AP reducing its transmission power by 2 dBm. These parameter choices make a perfect logical sense in reducing co-channel interference while providing the best coverage. The end result provides maximum throughput next to each AP without sticky client issue, even if I had Aruba Instant's client match turned off. So the chosen parameters are indeed appropriate. I have not seen any reason to manually optimize Aruba Instant. Ruckus Unleashed also has a built-in automatic radio resource management, including patented technology like ChannelFly, which uses actual channel capacity rather than interference measurement for dynamic adjustment of a channel. Although Ruckus Unleashed supports automatic transmission power adjustment, this is turned off by default and not recommended by Ruckus. Instead, Ruckus recommends to keep access points transmission power max and let their adaptive antenna technology beamflex plus to reduce co-channel interference. From what I have seen, this seems to be indeed the case with Ruckus Radio Resource Management. Unlike Aruba Instant Radio Resource Management, despite positioning Ruckus APs on the same location as Aruba, Ruckus often chose and kept overlapping channel, including 2.4 GHz, rather than picking 3 non-overlapping channels for each of 3 access points. Although I cannot say how well beamflex plus work for avoiding co-channel interference, I have been experiencing an issue with smooth roaming and sticky client with Ruckus Unleashed setup, especially when I added more access points with higher range coverage, with R550 and R750 in combination, as compared to R350 and R750. I have no doubt this can be fixed with proper selection of variable parameters. However, this involves essentially full manual tweaking. I've tried turning on automatic AP power adjustment, which did not help and actually just kept max power all 3 access points in my setup. I've also tried adjusting BSS minimum. This was still hit and miss for my setup and did not eliminate sticky client. I've also tried command line interface tool SmartRoll. This sounds like indeed a specific configuration parameter for sticky client elimination. However, this is actually a value-based configuration where we are essentially manually choosing threshold RSSI value to force dissociate client. Official recommendation is start small and gradually increase by trial and error. I personally believe BSS minimum adjustment is always a bit risky parameter to play with, since each client have different response. So overall, with Ruckus Unleashed setup, I have to spend hours during initial setup to get optimal performance as its RRM does not work well for roaming. However, once the proper cell size is configured, I believe Ruckus Unleashed RRM should be able to maintain the performance in hands-free as their channel adjustment works fairly well. From the practical standpoint, Unifi completely lacks any usable radio resource management. So here we need to rely on manual optimization for initial setup and also maintaining whenever Wi-Fi environment changes. The amount of time these optimizations require depends widely based on one's home setup and Wi-Fi environment. In my very limited personal experience, this feels exponential to the number of APs we have. This is because the more AP we have, the more risk we get to creating Wi-Fi interference from our own access points. So if you have only one AP and live in a fairly stable Wi-Fi environment where neighbors' Wi-Fi channel don't change much, this may be a fairly simple task. On the contrary, if you have multiple access points and neighbor changing their channel constantly, you will need to spend at least a couple hours during initial setup and then readjust channel whenever you start noticing performance degradation afterwards. Here are my personal take-home points. Unifi offers the consumer-graded gear level of simple setup. Being prosumer-graded system, it still has learning curve for home users, yet its best-in-class graphical user interface makes the process fun to play with. In contrast, Aruba Instant has the steepest learning curve with overwhelming amount of configuration options, with some being actually only functional with subscription. However, the more I learn Aruba Instant user interface, the more fun it becomes. The best feature of Aruba Instant is the real, true automatic radio resource management. As a home user, I can rely on Aruba Instant's radio resource management and eliminate my manual tweaking. This saves me at least a few hours. Ruckus Unleashed also offers automatic radio resource management. It does not work well fixing roaming or sticky client issue. So if you are an unlucky one like myself and end up facing the issue, you will need to manually fix this by playing with various parameters one at a time. Another downside of Ruckus Unleashed for my personal setup is its relative difficulty setting up Sonos in wireless configuration. This required me to go into command line interface and turn off QoS altogether. The solution makes me wonder the actual impact to the whole system. So in the end, Ruckus Unleashed setup forces me to use Sonos net setup rather than full wire setup. In summary, if you go with Aruba Instant, you are likely to be spending time on learning the system at the beginning. If you go with the Unifi, you will be spending whatever it takes to adjust RF parameters, and the amount of time you need varies significantly depending on phone Wi-Fi setup and environment. If you choose Ruckus Unleashed, there may be a chance you may need to spend a significant amount of time manually configuring proper RF at the beginning, and possibly to allow some client device to properly function. Thanks for watching.